this video, I'm going to talk about how to use Midjourney to create amazing cinematic images. I've got a really great prompt formula for you, and I'm going to share that with you today. Plus, we're going to go through the logic of it so that you can tweak it and do whatever you want with it. Okay, let's get started. If you've been following the channel, I've mentioned a few times, I am not a huge fan of prompt splattering, or prompt gore, as I like to call it. I think more often than not, Midjourney is pretty much ignoring 2/3 of those giant long prompts, so I think your time is better spent really honing in on your prompt and getting the most out of it. When I do see those longer prompts, I tend to think that they're pretty much like copy-pasted from somebody that shared their prompt, somebody else added to it, shared that prompt, and on it goes. It sort of turns into whisper down the lane, but by the end of it, you end up with this 5,000 character prompt that often contradicts itself. If you yourself are into writing super long prompts, then, more power to you. I just think that you tend to end up with better results and more control, oddly enough, with shorter prompts. So with that, let's take a look at the prompt formula I've got for you and break it all down. Okay, so here's the formula. Obviously, it starts off with /imagine, cinematic still, film by, scene, subject, action, set, and then a link, and then a shot, and then -- for whatever your modifiers are going to be. So let's break this all down. Cinematic still can be replaced with film still, movie footage. I haven't really seen a big difference in terms of changing those, but I think it acts as a major trigger for Midjourney to recognize that we're serious about doing something photorealistic and with a cinematic style. It really sets the stage for the prompt to follow, so make sure that that is up front. The second section, film by, is a pretty big modification trigger as well. This is where we can name reference directors or filmmakers, which is going to provide Midjourney with a lot of details on what the overall vibe is that we're looking for. So I think a lot of times when you're using those longer prompts and you're trying to direct things visually, if you have a reference director with a strong visual style, you don't need all of that other stuff. I think that that is telling Midjourney a lot of additional information that you wouldn't have to put into the back end of the prompt. Things like style, mood, even costume design to a large degree, that all gets incorporated in if you pick a director that sort of has a strong visual niche or style. Just as a quick example, here's how much referencing a director can impact a prompt. For this, I'm just going to use a very basic prompt. It's going to be cinematic still, film by, a leading actress, no direction there, medium shot, 35mm, and with an aspect ratio of 2:1. And I'm going to swap out film by for some various directors just to see how much everything changes. Let's go check it out. So our first filmmaker is Wes Anderson. It's a very Wes Anderson shot, leading actress, bullseye composition. All of the colors very chromatic, and the costuming is very kitschy retro. Following that up with the exact same prompt, except swapping out Wes Anderson for David Fincher, gives us this. Fincher has a very grounded, realistic, muted tone. Composition changes, becomes kind of more intense. Lighting definitely changes, becomes more realistic, muted, cold, the Fincher thing. Our same prompt with Tim Burton, Mr. Beetlejuice and Edward Scissorhands himself. This is actually sort of an interesting one as well, because you have that era of Tim Burton, but you also have an era of like Big Fish, which I think this image is referencing more. So that's something we'll talk about in a minute, but I think that sometimes you need to swap out a director reference for a film reference if you're looking for a specific era of that director. Next up, one of my favorite filmmakers, Guillermo del Toro. These images immediately look like they're screen grabs from, Pan's Labyrinth. But again, I didn't change anything in the prompt except for the name of the filmmaker. So obviously, film by is a pretty clutch player. I've been going through and cataloging all the filmmakers Midjourney seems to know. I've got that in a style guide linked below. It's free, just go ahead and click on it. The next area of the prompt is the scene, subject, and action area. This is where we're going to describe what our character looks like, maybe have a description of what they're doing. You can put details about the set and the set design in there. And this is the place to put any props that your character might be holding, such as holding an umbrella, holding a sword, that sort of thing. After we have that established, we move on to what I call the link section. That's the instruction that serves as sort of a bridge between our director's chair and our cinematographer's chair. If you think about that whole first part of the prompt, it was very much more based in story, kind of the performance side of the images. The link is the bridge that gets us over to the technical side of it. The link is where we can describe whether the shot is in the day or at nighttime, what the locale is, if it's inside or outside. For those of you who have read screenplays or have written screenplays, I think of this part as the scene header slug, you know, they like interior kitchen night or like exterior school day. That's kind of what this section is. In filmic terms, I think you can think of the link section as a location manager or, you know, your first AD. Once we have all of that established, then we move over to our shot composition. So this is the area where you're gonna wanna focus on your shot composition. Here are some standard call-out shots that seem to work pretty well in Midjourney. The wide angle shot, which pulls the camera back from our subject. The ultra wide angle shot, which pulls our camera very far back from the subject. Satellite view, which pulls the camera into the stratosphere. Eye level shot, which is the camera even with the head of the figure. The low angle shot, which is, you know, on the ground and looking up, kind of like a puppy dog looking up at a person. The full body shot, head to toe, but depending on your aspect ratio, sometimes you get this and sometimes you don't. We also have the close up, the over the shoulder, and the two shot. The two shot can get a little finicky at times though, depending. Other things you can put in this section would be lens lengths, 35mm, 10mm, 50mm. I would be a little careful if you don't know your lens length terminology though, only because that's a good way of creating contradictory information if you're saying something like an ultra wide shot with a 200mm lens, which would not be the lens for that job. I'm sure there are plenty of YouTube tutorials on lens lengths out there. I don't know if there's any for Midjourney. If you guys want me to, I am more than happy to make one. Just let me know in the comments below. For those of you who would like to provide f-stops in your prompts, this is also a good place to do so. Quick rundown for those of you who don't know their f-stops. It's really simple. The lower the f-stop, the blurrier the background. The higher the f-stop, the sharper it is. Here's an example of a lollipop at f2.8, which means the background is very soft and blurry. However, an image at f22 is going to have a very sharp background all the way to the horizon. Minor cinematography trivia as well. On film cameras, it's actually called the T-stop. I did try putting T-stops into Midjourney. It kind of just ignored me. So I guess it doesn't know T-stops. And lastly, in the dash section, that's where we get to aspect ratio. I think to get a really good like cinematic look, you should go with AR21. Since V4, Midjourney has had 16:9, which I think most people think like, oh, it's widescreen because that's what my TV is. But if you want to get like a really cinematic widescreen look, try out 2:1. So aspect ratios are a whole thing and basically an entire video unto themselves. But basically that big widescreen look historically has either been 1.85 or 2.35, which is why on your 16:9 TV, when you pop in, say, Jurassic Park, it still is letterboxed. Unless you're using that zoom in feature that some modern TVs have, just don't do that. Don't do it. It's bad. It's bad. Don't do it. Midjourney doesn't have 1.85 or 2.35, but it does have 2.1. And weirdly enough, that's an aspect ratio that's starting to get used a lot more these days. Jurassic World used it, for example, and Netflix uses it a ton. Stranger Things is actually shot with 2.1. So if you're looking for that big widescreen look, 2.1, it's the way to go. So now that we've got the prompt formula, let's take the whole thing and take a look at some images. The prompt here is cinematic still, filmed by Akira Kurosawa, epic samurai battle, day, close-up, 35mm, 1960 Kodachrome. It definitely looks cinematic. The fact that I call that a close-up, I think, gave us that shallow depth of field, the blurry background, so there was no need to put shallow depth of field or call out an f-stop on this one. In terms of actually nailing the directorial style of Akira Kurosawa, I don't think it quite nailed it, but let's try rolling a few more times and see what we can get. On a re-roll, I got something kind of closer to what I was looking for, but it definitely has the look of later era Akira Kurosawa, sort of like 85 Ron, which is a great movie if you haven't seen it. So funny enough, I kind of veered off a little bit while I was rolling these to mess around with the idea of blending filmmakers with genres that they hadn't worked in. Just for fun, I decided to modify the prompt to cinematic still, filmed by Akira Kurosawa, samurai holding lightsaber in battle on a spaceship fighting robots, wide angle, style by sci-fi, 35mm, 8K. That style by prompt is the thing that really just warps your image into a whole crazy place. So anyhow, Akira Kurosawa in space, the second I hit enter and as it started generating, I started laughing to myself because that's basically Star Wars. And indeed, the images that I came out with were, Star Wars. So I guess if you're looking for a Star Wars prompt without saying Star Wars, Akira Kurosawa in space. Just to show you how much latitude you have in terms of like the film stocks that you pick in the back end as well, I gave Midjourney the prompt cinematic still, a film by John Ford. John Ford being the legendary film director who directed films like Stagecoach, Rio Grande, and The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. Actually, if you watch Meet the Friedmans, Spielberg's new movie, John Ford plays a pretty large part in that. Anyhow, 1960 Kodachrome, that was kind of the look that I was going for. And I would say Midjourney delivered on that. It definitely has that sort of washed out, sort of 60s kind of Western feel to it. And just as an alternate, I decided to give more or less the same prompt. I actually did change the filmmaker from John Ford to Sam Raimi. I was just thinking The Quick and the Dead, which is a great movie if you haven't seen that, but changed the back end prompt to Kodak, more of a modern film stock, and this is the image that we got. I'm sure some of you have run into this before, but if you're someone that likes to call out focal lens lengths or lenses, you may end up with characters holding cameras. In this case, the prompt was cinematic still, filmed by James Cameron, Space Marines shooting at a Lovecraftian monster in a spaceship, horror lighting, wide angle 20 millimeter, with an aspect ratio of 2:1. And yeah, I just kept getting characters that had cameras pointed at monsters. I actually used this technique and utilized Midjourney entirely for a short film that is on this channel about John Carpenter making an alien film before Ridley Scott made an alien film. You can check that out below. It's actually, I'm really proud of that one. I think it's really cool. The other interesting thing about calling out filmmakers in prompts is that a lot of times the characters that will appear in those prompts tend to be actors kind of like loosely associated within the genre. In this case, I used a prompt, cinematic still, filmed by the Coen brothers, businessman sitting at a table. And in this case, we ended up with two actors. Like this image looks a lot like Adrian Brody, and in this image, the actor looks a lot like Adam Driver. Midjourney tends to obscure famous faces, and I think that if I had asked for Adam Driver, there's no way that I would have got him, but at a random Coen brothers role, I did get him. That same prompt got me this image, which is like the saddest image in the world. It's like a business guy at a dinner table, and I think that, to me, the story is that that's a picture of his father just looking at him disapprovingly because he's just alone in his home. It's very Coen brothers. So that's the basic prompt formula, but there's a lot more to go too. So if you enjoyed this, please consider hitting the like and subscribe button so you don't miss the next part. And since you're clearly a Midjourney user, you might enjoy this next video. I mean, I do get it. There's only so much of me that any one person can marathon, but maybe just one more. All right, we'll see ya.